Maya had been up all night preparing for her big undercover operation. The weight of the mission on her shoulders made her eyes heavy, but she knew this was her chance to make a difference. She'd always wanted to help people, and today she was going to do just that. She drove through the quiet streets, the cool night air rushing through her car window as she tried to stay focused. But little did she know, something was about to happen that would change everything. As Maya turned a corner, she saw flashing red and blue lights in her rearview mirror. Her heart skipped a beat. She wasn't speeding or breaking any laws. Her hands tightened on the wheel, but she remained calm. She pulled over, parking her car on the side of the road. The officer who approached her car looked young, maybe in his late 20s. He was tall, with a harsh expression on his face, and his uniform was crisply pressed. Maya didn't recognize him, but that didn't matter. She had been stopped by cops before, and she knew the drill. The officer came to her window and said, "License and registration." Maya quickly handed over her papers, but before she could say anything, the officer glanced at her and asked, "What's your hurry, ma'am?" Maya's brow furrowed. She didn't think she was in a hurry. "I'm just heading to work," she replied, trying to stay polite. The officer looked at her for a moment, his eyes scanning her face. Maya felt a strange tension in the air. She had dealt with rude officers before, but something felt different this time. It wasn't just his coldness. There was something deeper in his gaze, something she couldn't place. Then, with no warning, the officer asked, "What are you really doing out here at this time of night?" Maya was taken aback. She had worked hard to get where she was. As a black woman in the FBI, she had earned every bit of respect she received. But here she was, being treated like a criminal for simply doing her job. "I'm an FBI agent," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. "I'm heading to an assignment." The officer didn't seem to care. Instead of listening to her, he scoffed. "FBI agent, huh? I don't buy it. You think I'm just going to believe that?" Maya's heart started racing. She had been in tough situations before, but this felt different. The officer wasn't asking questions. He was accusing her without reason. She showed him her badge, hoping it would end the conversation. But when he looked at the badge, his expression didn't change. "I don't care what you say," the officer snapped. "You're coming with me." Maya's mind raced. "What? Why?" "I'm telling you the truth. I'm an agent." The officer stepped back and grabbed his radio. "I'm arresting you. You can explain it to the judge." Maya couldn't believe it. She had dealt with discrimination before, but she never imagined it would happen like this. She tried to explain, but he wasn't listening. Her words fell on deaf ears. "Out of the car," the officer ordered, his voice cold. Maya hesitated, but she knew there was nothing she could do. She had to comply, even though she knew it wasn't right. He opened the door and grabbed her arm roughly. Maya's heart pounded in her chest. She had always stayed calm in dangerous situations, but this was different. This wasn't about protecting people. This was about a man's hate and prejudice. As the officer shoved her toward his patrol car, a crowd began to gather. People on the street stared in confusion. Some whispered to each other, while others watched with disbelief. Maya was humiliated. She couldn't understand how this was happening. She was a dedicated agent, someone who had worked hard to serve the public, and now she was being treated like a criminal for something she didn't do. But Maya wasn't going to break. She had faced worse before, and she wouldn't let this officer take her down. Her mind raced with thoughts of how to prove her innocence, but for now, all she could do was stay calm. The officer pushed her into the back of the squad car and slammed the door shut. Maya sat there, her hands shaking, but her resolve growing stronger. She couldn't let this moment define her. She had to fight back. She wasn't just going to let this go. But what could she do? The thought of what was to come next filled her with a mix of anger and fear. Little did the officer know, Maya was no ordinary woman. She was an FBI agent, and she wasn't about to let his racism destroy everything she had worked for. Maya sat in the back of the squad car, her hands tightly gripping the seat as the officer drove her to the station. Her heart raced with anger and confusion. How could this be happening? She had always worked hard to earn the respect of her colleagues and the people she served. Now she was being treated like a criminal, simply because of her skin color. It didn't make sense. But Maya was no stranger to injustice. She had faced racism before, but this felt different. This wasn't just a random act of hate. This was an officer who had made up his mind about her before he even knew who she was. The officer drove in silence, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Maya could feel the tension in the air, a cold, oppressive feeling that made her stomach turn. Every time she tried to speak, the officer ignored her. It was as if she didn't even exist. The only thing that mattered to him was getting her to the station and out of his way. When they arrived, the officer roughly pulled her out of the car and led her inside the station. Maya's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts. She couldn't believe what was happening. The humiliation she felt was almost too much to bear. She was an FBI agent, someone who had dedicated her life to fighting for justice. And here she was, being treated like a criminal for no reason at all. Inside the station, the officers gave her no time to explain. They didn't want to hear her side of the story. They just pushed her into a holding cell and left her there, alone with her thoughts. Maya sat on the cold bench, her hands still shaking, but her mind was sharp. She knew she had to stay calm. She couldn't let this officer's actions ruin her career. She had to fight back. As the minutes turned into hours, Maya began to realize just how deep the racism ran in the police department. She had heard stories, of course, but this was different. She was in the heart of it now. The officers here didn't care who she was or what she stood for. To them, she was just another black woman to be treated unfairly. Suddenly, the door to her cell opened, and another officer walked in. This one looked younger, maybe in his 30s. He was tall, with short cropped hair, and wore a stern expression. He didn't say anything at first, just stared at Maya for a long moment. Then he spoke. "You don't belong here," he said, his voice quiet but firm. Maya looked up at him, surprised by his words. She had expected more hostility, but this officer seemed different. His gaze was calm, almost sympathetic, but there was a hint of fear in his eyes. He must have seen the truth, too. He knew something was wrong with what had happened, but he didn't know how to fix it. Maya didn't say anything. She didn't have to. She had always believed in the power of silence to show strength. And right now, that silence spoke louder than words ever could. "I'm sorry," the officer said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I can't do anything to help you, but I just wanted you to know. Not everyone here thinks like him." Maya nodded, grateful for his honesty, but it didn't change the fact that she was still sitting in a holding cell, falsely arrested and humiliated. She wasn't sure what to do next, but she knew one thing for certain. This wasn't over. She wouldn't let it be. After what felt like an eternity, the door opened again. This time, it was a woman, a senior officer. She had a no-nonsense attitude, and when she saw Maya, her eyes softened. Without saying a word, the woman walked over to Maya and unlocked the cell door. "You're free to go," she said, "but don't think this is the end. We're going to look into what happened here." Maya didn't move right away. She had been ready to fight, to make sure everyone knew what had happened to her. But now that the moment was here, she wasn't sure what to say. The officer's words gave her hope, but the truth was, she knew this battle was just beginning. As she stepped out of the cell, the other officers avoided her gaze. It was as if they were too ashamed to face her. She knew they all saw what had happened, but they didn't know how to fix it. Maya felt a sense of power growing inside her. This wasn't just about her anymore. It was about every person who had been wronged by the system. She would not let this go. The officer who had arrested her had tried to break her, but instead, he had made her stronger. She would take this fight all the way. She wasn't just a victim of racism. She was going to be the one to make a change. The hours following Maya's release from the holding cell felt like a blur. She couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that lingered in the air. She had been let go, but that didn't mean she was free. The truth had been twisted, and it had to come out. Maya knew that if she didn't fight back, this would just become another sad story of injustice, something that would be swept under the rug. She couldn't let that happen. As she walked out of the station, Maya pulled out her phone and called her partner, Alex. Alex had been her closest ally in the FBI. He was a good man, someone who believed in justice and doing the right thing. Maya needed him now more than ever. "Maya, are you okay?" Alex's voice was full of concern when he answered. "I heard what happened. This is crazy." "I'm fine," Maya replied, though her voice betrayed her. "But this is far from over. We need to get to the bottom of this." "Of course," Alex said quickly. "I'll meet you at the office. We'll figure this out." When Maya arrived at the FBI office, Alex was already waiting for her. He was pacing back and forth, a sign that he was just as frustrated as she was. The moment Maya walked in, he stopped and looked at her with a serious expression. "Let's go through everything. We need to figure out who this officer is and why he did this." Maya nodded. "I've already thought of that. I want to start by digging into his history. I bet this isn't the first time he's done something like this." Alex agreed. "I'll pull up any past reports on him. We'll find out everything we can." The two of them sat down at their desks, their minds working quickly. Maya's hands shook slightly as she clicked through the files on her computer. She couldn't stop thinking about the officer's cold eyes, the way he had looked at her as if she didn't matter. It wasn't just about her arrest anymore. It was about something bigger. She needed to know who this officer was, what kind of person he was, and whether anyone had tried to stop him before. After hours of searching, Alex found something. "Maya, you need to see this," he said, his voice tight with disbelief. Maya leaned over his shoulder and saw what Alex had pulled up. Several complaints about the officer. His name was Officer Daniels, and his file was filled with reports of racial profiling. Maya felt her stomach turn as she read through the details. He had stopped black drivers for no reason, made discriminatory comments, and even had complaints of excessive force. The most shocking part was that none of the previous complaints had ever led to any action being taken against him. It was as if he was protected by his position, allowed to continue his behavior without consequence. "This is exactly what I thought," Maya muttered. "This officer has been doing this for years, and no one did anything about it." Alex looked at her with a mix of anger and sadness. "It's clear this is part of a bigger problem, Maya. You're not the first victim of this officer's hate." Maya's hands clenched into fists. She had always known that racism existed in law enforcement, but seeing it laid out in front of her like this made her blood boil. Officer Daniels hadn't just mistreated her. He had done this to countless other people, and nobody had stopped him. It was like a silent agreement that allowed him to act however he wanted. "We can't let this go," Maya said, her voice firm. "We have to expose him. We have to make sure this stops." Alex nodded, his eyes determined. "We'll gather evidence, get statements from other people he's hurt, and build a case against him. But we need to be careful. He's got a lot of support in that department." Maya knew he was right. This wasn't just about one officer. This was about a broken system. She couldn't take him down alone. She needed the support of her team, of people who understood the importance of justice, no matter how difficult the fight. The next few days were filled with endless calls and meetings. Maya and Alex worked tirelessly to gather evidence. They interviewed people who had been victims of Officer Daniels, collected photos of the places he had targeted, and even found video footage that proved his behavior. The more they uncovered, the more they realized how deep the corruption ran. This wasn't just a rogue officer. It was a problem that had been ignored for too long. Maya knew that the truth was finally coming to light. But it wasn't just about exposing Officer Daniels. It was about showing everyone that the system could change if people were willing to stand up and speak out. Maya had fought for justice her whole life, and now it was time for her to take action. Maya's determination grew stronger each day as she and Alex dug deeper into Officer Daniels' past. The more they uncovered, the more troubling it became. What started as one bad incident, a racist arrest, had quickly turned into something much bigger. It wasn't just that Officer Daniels was cruel or rude to black people. He had a long history of abuse, and it was all hidden beneath layers of silence and protection. Maya sat at her desk, staring at the files on her computer. She had already gone through dozens of pages, but something about Daniel's past still didn't sit right with her. She clicked on the next file, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. The file was a complaint from a local community group, dated 3 years ago. The report described how Officer Daniels had stopped a black man on a routine traffic stop, then escalated the situation with unnecessary force. The man had ended up in the hospital, and Daniels had faced no consequences. The complaint was buried, never reaching a higher authority. Maya felt a surge of anger rise within her. This has been happening for years, she muttered to herself. She clicked on more files, one after another. Each one painted a clearer picture of Daniel's behavior, racial profiling, excessive force, and a disturbing lack of accountability. And each time, the department had ignored the complaints, allowing him to continue. Alex walked into the room, carrying a stack of papers. His face was grim, and he didn't need to say anything for Maya to note he had found something important. "I think we've got him," Alex said, placing the papers on her desk. Maya's heart skipped a beat. "What do you mean?" Alex sat down beside her. "I've gone through Daniel's entire record, and there's a pattern. Every time a complaint was filed, the department either covered it up or swept it under the rug. It's not just him, it's the system protecting him." Maya stared at the papers in front of her. Alex was right. This wasn't just one bad officer. Officer Daniels had been shielded by a system that allowed him to hurt people without fear of getting caught. The weight of the discovery hit Maya hard. She felt like she was up against something far bigger than she had imagined. "The department's turning a blind eye," Maya said, her voice thick with frustration. "They knew what he was doing, and they let it happen." Alex nodded. "And they've kept it quiet for years. But it's not just about Daniels anymore. It's about the people who covered for him. We have to expose all of it." Maya looked at the evidence in front of her. She knew what they had to do now. It wasn't just about stopping Officer Daniels. It was about shining a light on the entire system that had allowed him to do this. She could feel the weight of the task ahead, but there was no turning back. She had to do this for the people who had suffered at Daniel's hands, for the people who had been silenced for too long. As Maya sat there, looking over the papers, something caught her eye. It was a small note in the margin of one of the complaint files, written by an officer she didn't recognize. The note said, "Daniels has connections with higher-ups. Be careful." Maya's pulse quickened. This was bigger than just the officers protecting him. There were people in positions of power who had helped cover his tracks. She could feel the walls closing in around her. This was going to be harder than she thought. If she went after Daniels, she was going after some of the most powerful people in the department. "This is worse than we thought," Maya said, her voice filled with determination. "We're not just dealing with a rogue cop. We're dealing with an entire system that's been protecting him." Alex leaned forward, his face serious. "We can't back down now. We've got the proof. We need to go public." Maya agreed. She knew the risks were high, but she couldn't let fear stop her. The truth had to come out. She was ready to expose the corruption, no matter the cost. Over the next few days, Maya and Alex worked nonstop. They contacted whistleblowers, gathered more evidence, and reached out to journalists who could help expose the truth. The deeper they went, the more they realized how deep the corruption ran. Daniels wasn't the only one who had abused his power. He was just the one who had been caught. Maya wasn't scared anymore. She had a mission. She had the truth. And now she was going to make sure the world knew what had been hidden for so long. Maya couldn't sleep. The weight of everything she had uncovered kept her awake, turning over in her mind. The truth was out there now, but it wasn't enough just to know it. She had to act. The corruption she had uncovered wasn't just a problem for one officer. It was a problem that went all the way to the top. If she wanted to make a difference, she couldn't be afraid anymore. She had to take a stand. The next morning, Maya sat at her desk, staring at the phone. She had already contacted several journalists who were interested in her story, but she knew it wasn't enough to just tell it. She needed the world to hear the truth. She needed the department to feel the heat of her words, to understand that they couldn't keep hiding what they had done. "Maya, we're ready," Alex said, stepping into her office. He looked as determined as she felt. "The media is lined up. We've got all the evidence. It's time." Maya took a deep breath. She knew this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about everyone who had been wronged, about every person who had been silenced or ignored. This was her chance to make sure that didn't happen again. "I'm ready," she said, her voice steady. "Let's do this." They walked to the press conference room, and Maya could feel her heart pounding in her chest. The room was filled with reporters, all of them eager for the story. Maya stood in front of the microphones, her hands steady at her sides. She wasn't just standing up for herself. She was standing up for every victim of corruption, every person who had been abused by those in power. The moment the microphone was in front of her, Maya began speaking. "Good morning. My name is Maya Williams. I am an FBI agent, and I am here to expose the truth." The room fell silent as everyone waited for her to continue. "Officer Daniels, a member of this department, has been engaging in racial profiling, excessive force, and abuse of power for years. His actions have harmed many innocent people, and the department has turned a blind eye to it. But it doesn't stop there. The system that protected him is broken, and it's time we fixed it." Maya paused, letting her words sink in. She could see the shock on the reporters' faces. They had no idea what was coming. "I've gathered evidence, I've spoken to victims, and I've seen firsthand the damage that Officer Daniels has caused. But he is not the only one to blame. The higher-ups in this department have been covering up his actions for years. They knew what he was doing, and they allowed it to continue." There were gasps from the crowd. The room was buzzing with whispers, and Maya could feel the tension rise. But she didn't stop. She couldn't. This is not just about one bad cop. This is about a system that allowed him to hurt people without facing any consequences. The time for silence is over. We have to hold every person who enabled him accountable. No one is above the law. The reporters' questions came fast and furious, but Maya stayed calm. She answered each one with confidence, knowing she had the truth on her side. She explained the evidence she had gathered, the complaints, the reports, the testimonies from victims. She told them about the department's refusal to take action, about how they had allowed Daniels to keep his job despite the growing pile of evidence against him. When the press conference ended, Maya felt a strange sense of relief. It was done. The truth was out there, and there was no taking it back. She had stood up, and now it was up to the world to listen. But as Maya walked out of the room, she knew this was just the beginning. The department wouldn't go down without a fight. She had made herself a target, but she wasn't scared. She had already faced the worst. And now she was going to make sure the world knew who was really responsible for the harm that had been done. Alex caught up with her in the hallway. "You did it, Maya. You took a stand." Maya smiled, but there was a fire in her eyes. "It's not over yet. We still have a lot of work to do, but this is a start." As she left the building, Maya knew that this fight was far from finished. But she was ready. She had stood up for what was right, and she wasn't going to back down now. The day after the press conference, the atmosphere in the FBI office was thick with tension. Maya could feel eyes on her wherever she went. Her actions had sparked something much bigger than she had expected. News outlets were already reporting on the case, but it wasn't just the media that had taken notice. The higher-ups in the department were watching too. Maya knew this wouldn't be easy, but she couldn't back down now. She had already taken the first step, and there was no turning back. As Maya sat at her desk, reviewing more evidence, her phone buzzed. The name on the screen made her stomach drop. Assistant Director Robert Harris. He was one of the most powerful people in the department, and he had always been a supporter of the status quo. Maya had expected a call like this, but that didn't make it any easier. Agent Williams. Harris's voice was cold and professional. We need to talk. Now. Maya's heart raced, but she kept her voice steady. Of course, sir. I'll be there in 5 minutes. When she arrived at Harris's office, he was waiting for her behind his large desk, his expression hard and unwelcoming. The door shut behind Maya with a quiet click, and she knew she was about to face the consequences of her actions. Maya, I hope you understand the gravity of what you've done, Harris said, his voice low and stern. You've stirred up a storm, and now you're asking for trouble. Maya didn't flinch. She had prepared herself for this. I'm not asking for trouble, sir. I'm asking for justice. Harris's eyes narrowed. You've exposed a problem, yes, but you've also made it harder for everyone involved. Do you really think this is the way to handle things? You've put us all in a difficult position. Maya stood tall, meeting his gaze. The difficult position is the one that Officer Daniels put people in with his abuse. The difficult position is the one the department put itself in by covering it up. You want to talk about difficult positions. Think about the people whose lives were ruined while the department turned a blind eye. Harris didn't respond right away. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, his fingers pressed together, as if calculating his next move. You're being reckless, Maya. You're going against the department, against the system. Do you think you can win this fight? Maya felt her pulse quicken. This was the moment. She knew the system would fight back, but she wasn't going to let it intimidate her. I'm not fighting against the system, sir. I'm fighting for it, she said firmly. The system is supposed to protect people, not hurt them. What Daniels did, what you've allowed to happen, is wrong. I'm not backing down. Harris' expression hardened, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Maybe it was fear, or maybe it was respect. Either way, Maya wasn't sure what to make of it. She couldn't afford to focus on him. She had a bigger fight ahead. This is bigger than you, Maya, Harris said quietly. This could destroy everything we've worked for. You've just made a lot of powerful enemies. Maya didn't hesitate. I've already made my choice. I'm not afraid of enemies. I'm not afraid of losing my job. What matters is doing the right thing. For a long moment, there was silence in the room. Harris stared at her, weighing her words. Finally, he stood up and walked around the desk, his steps slow and deliberate. He came to a stop in front of Maya, looking down at her with a calm expression. I'll make sure you understand the consequences of your actions, he said softly. But know this, you've set something in motion that can't be stopped now. You've drawn a line in the sand, and there's no going back. Maya stood her ground, her heart pounding, but her resolve stronger than ever. I'm ready for whatever comes next, because the truth always finds a way to come out, and I won't let anyone hide it again. With that, Harris turned and walked back to his desk. He didn't say another word as Maya left his office. She knew the battle was just beginning, but she wasn't scared. She had made her stand, and now she had to follow through. Outside the office, Maya could feel the weight of the situation settle in. She had just confronted one of the most powerful men in the department, and she knew there would be consequences. But no matter what happened next, she was ready. She had a mission, and she wasn't going to back down now. Maya sat at her desk late into the night, her eyes tired but determined. The battle wasn't over yet. In fact, it had only just begun. After her confrontation with Assistant Director Harris, the tension in the office had reached a new high. Maya knew she was risking everything, but the thought of letting the department continue to protect corrupt officers weighed heavily on her. She had to push forward, no matter the cost. The media was still buzzing about her press conference, and the calls kept coming. Journalists wanted more, wanted deeper details, and wanted to know how far Maya was willing to go. Maya was ready for them. She had already taken the first step in exposing Officer Daniels, But she knew she needed more. The public had to see the truth. As she sifted through files on her computer, Maya's phone buzzed again. This time, it was an email from one of the journalists she had contacted earlier. The subject line read, "Your story. It's bigger than we thought." Maya clicked on the message, her heart racing. The journalist explained how they had traced the connections between Daniels and several high-ranking officials in the department. They had uncovered proof that Daniels wasn't working alone. He had been part of a network of corrupt officers who had been operating for years. The department, from the top down, had been protecting them all. Maya sat back in her chair, stunned. The scale of what she had uncovered was even bigger than she realized. This wasn't just about Officer Daniels anymore. This was about an entire system of corruption that had been hiding in plain sight. She couldn't let it go now. She had to take action, but she needed help. The next morning, Maya met with Alex to discuss the new revelations. They sat in the small cafe near the office, the quiet hum of conversation around them barely noticeable as they focused on the task at hand. "This is huge, Maya," Alex said, looking over the documents the journalist had sent. "If we can prove these connections, this could shake the entire department. We're talking about a whole network of officers, and it goes all the way to the top." Maya nodded, her eyes focused. "This isn't just about one officer anymore. We have to expose the whole system. We can't let them keep getting away with it." Alex's face was serious. "We're going to need more than just proof. We'll need allies, people inside the department who are willing to speak out. It's going to be dangerous." Maya understood, but the thought of continuing to let corruption destroy innocent lives was more terrifying than any danger they might face. "We don't have a choice, Alex. We have to do this." Over the next few days, Maya and Alex worked tirelessly. They reached out to current and former officers who had witnessed the corruption firsthand. Some were too scared to speak out, but others, fed up with the system, agreed to help. Slowly but surely, Maya started to piece together the full extent of the network. With each new revelation, the weight on her shoulders grew heavier, but so did her resolve. She knew the risks. She was already facing threats from within the department. The higher-ups weren't going to let this go quietly. But Maya wasn't backing down. She had taken a stand, and now she was going to bring the whole system to its knees. A week later, Maya and Alex sat in a small conference room. Surrounded by documents and evidence, they had gathered everything they needed. Now it was time to go public again. "Maya, this is it," Alex said, his voice full of urgency. "We have everything. We can expose them all, every officer involved in this, every corrupt leader." Maya looked at the files in front of her. It was overwhelming, but she knew what she had to do. "We're going to make sure the world knows what's been happening. We'll bring down the whole network. This is bigger than just one officer. This is a change that needs to happen." The decision was made. Maya and Alex contacted the media again, this time with even more explosive information. The world was going to know the truth, and nothing could stop them now. That evening, Maya sat in her apartment, reflecting on everything that had happened. It had been a long road, filled with challenges and dangers. But now, she was closer than ever to exposing the corruption that had been allowed to thrive in silence for so long. The system was broken, but Maya wasn't just going to expose it. She was going to help tear it down, piece by piece. Maya smiled to herself, the weight of the journey still there, but lighter now. She had started something, and now there was no turning back. A bigger change was coming, and she was ready to lead the way.